February 23rd, 1945, 6:15 in the morning, the Mohenwood Forest, Rhineland, Germany. The frost clung to everything like a shroud. Corporal Jacques Delacroix pressed his numb fingers against the cold steel of his No. 4 Mark I Lee Enfield rifle. His breath formed small clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. In his right hand he clutched something that would have made any quartermaster furious: a dented British Army tomato tin. Its paper label long since rotted away. Crude holes punched through both ends, a series of smaller perforations along one side. Through his scope, a Canadian-made No. 32 Mark III, Jacques studied the German positions 400 yards distant across the frozen killing ground. The tomato tin sat wedged between two rocks 30 feet to his right, positioned at an angle he had calculated during 3 hours of careful observation the previous night. At 6:27, the first weak rays of winter sun broke through the skeletal trees. The tin caught the light. A dim orange glow appeared on one side, then brightened as the sun climbed higher. The perforations Jacques had punched created a pattern of light spots that danced across the snow like fireflies in winter. 400 yards away, a German sentry shifted position to investigate the strange pattern of lights that seemed to pulse and move. For exactly 4 seconds, the German's head rose above the sandbag parapet of his fighting position. Jacques' rifle spoke once. The sentry collapsed. The first kill of what would become the most psychologically devastating 4 days of the Rhineland campaign had just occurred. Before this week ended, Corporal Delacroix would use variations of his tomato tin technique to eliminate 137 confirmed enemy combatants. He would force the withdrawal of an entire German battalion from a critical defensive sector. He would create a tactical innovation that British and Canadian forces would adopt across the entire Western Front. What began as an accidental discovery involving morning tea and a discarded food tin would transform into a systematic method of psychological dominance that German forces had no counter for. The equation of survival was being rewritten, not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through peasant cunning applied to garbage. But to understand how a French-Canadian trapper's son turned tin cans into instruments of death, we must go back. Back to the frozen marshes of Quebec. Back to the Depression years when missing a shot meant a family went hungry. Back to a childhood where patience wasn't just a virtue, it was survival itself. Rivière-du-Loup, Quebec. Population 412. Winter, 1933. Jacques Delacroix was 12 years old the first time his father taught him that wasting bullets was a sin. The Yamaska River marshes stretched before them like a gray-white canvas, frozen solid in places, treacherous in others. Snow fell in thick curtains. The boy's fingers were numb inside his too thin gloves. His father's gloves, actually, cut down to fit smaller hands. Jean-Baptiste Delacroix knelt beside his son in the pre-dawn darkness. A coal miner by trade, a hunter by necessity. His face was weathered leather, creased by underground darkness and surface poverty in equal measure. Un coup, Jacques. One shot. The words came out as vapor in the frigid air. If you miss the rabbit, we don't eat tonight. Your mother, your sister, me, we all go hungry because you were impatient, because you didn't wait for the certain shot. Jacques nodded. He didn't speak. He had learned early that words carried on winter air, that sound traveled differently when everything was frozen. His father's hand, massive and scarred from years of swinging a pickaxe, rested gently on the boy's shoulder. Patience, son. The impatient hunter starves. The patient hunter feeds his family. Remember this. They waited and waited. Jacques' legs cramped. His nose ran. His fingers lost feeling entirely. The rifle, an ancient bolt action his grandfather had carried in the Great War, grew heavier with each passing minute. But he didn't move, because 30 yards away, partially hidden by brush, A snowshoe hare sat motionless, its white winter coat perfect camouflage against the snow. Only the black tips of its ears gave it away. The hare was waiting too, waiting for predators to grow impatient and leave, waiting for safety. 2 hours passed. The sun climbed higher, weak and distant through the clouds. Jacques' teeth chattered. He clenched his jaw to stop the sound. And then the hare moved. Just 6 inches, enough to expose its full profile. Jacques didn't think. His body moved on instinct honed by months of his father's teaching. Breathe in, breathe out. Halfway between breaths, squeeze. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. The hare dropped. His father's hand tightened on his shoulder. Not a word spoken, but Jacques felt the pride radiating from the man like heat from a forge. That night, his family ate rabbit stew with the last of the winter potatoes. His mother cried quietly while she served it, not from sadness, from relief. It was 1933. The Depression had devoured the world's economy like a plague. The coal mine where Jean-Baptiste worked had cut wages 3 times in 2 years. Food was a luxury. Wasted bullets were a tragedy. Jacques learned to hunt the way other boys learned to read, because survival demanded it. The years that followed carved the lessons deeper. Winter, 1935. Jacques was 14. He and his father sat in a blind they'd built from dead branches and frozen mud. 8 hours they'd been waiting. The December cold seeped through every layer of clothing, through skin, into bone. A white-tailed buck moved through the timber 200 yards distant. A big one, 8 points, enough venison to feed the family for 2 weeks. Maybe 3 if they were careful. Jacques' father whispered, "You see him?" "Yes, Papa." "Can you make the shot?" Jacques studied the deer through the rifle's iron sights. 200 yards, wind moving left to right, maybe 5 miles per hour. The buck was moving slowly, grazing, unaware of danger. Every instinct screamed at Jacques to shoot, to take the shot before the opportunity vanished. His family needed this meat, needed it desperately. But his father's voice echoed in his memory. "Never shoot unless you are certain." "Papa," Jacques whispered, "he's moving wrong. The angle's not clean. I might wound him." His father was silent for 10 seconds that felt like 10 hours. "Then we wait." They waited another hour. The cold became something alive, something malicious. Jacques couldn't feel his feet. His hands trembled. The rifle felt like it weighed 100 pounds. But the buck eventually turned broadside, stopped to investigate something in the snow. Perfectly still, perfectly positioned. Jacques breathed in, breathed out. Halfway between breaths, squeezed. The buck dropped where it stood. His father clapped him on the back, hard enough to hurt, hard enough to mean something. "You could have taken that first shot, Jacques. Probably would have hit him. But probably isn't certain. And uncertain shots make animals suffer, make families go hungry when wounded deer run too far to track." They field-dressed the buck together, his father teaching with every cut of the knife, nothing wasted, nothing taken for granted. That venison lasted them through February. Jacques learned something crucial that day, something that would save his life and take many others years later in a German forest. Patience wasn't passive. It was active. It was aggressive. It was choosing the right moment with absolute conviction and rejecting everything else. It was the difference between eating and starving, between living and dying. 1938 changed everything. Jacques was 17, old enough to work, not old enough to escape the weight of responsibility that fell on him like an avalanche. The mine accident happened on a Tuesday. Jacques was in school when the whistle blew. 3 short blasts, the signal everyone in Rivière-du-Loup knew and feared. Cave-in. He ran the 2 miles to the mine entrance with his heart hammering, joined the crowd of wives and children and mothers waiting for news, waiting to learn who would come home and who wouldn't. His father came home, but not whole. The cave-in had crushed his left leg. The company doctor said he'd walk again, maybe, with a cane, with pain, but he'd never work underground again, never swing a pickaxe, never provide. Jean-Baptiste Delacroix cried exactly once, the night he came home from the hospital. Jacques heard him through the thin walls of their company house, heard his mother trying to comfort him, heard his father's voice, broken. "How do I feed them, Marie? How do I provide?" The next morning, Jacques left school. He never went back. At 17, he became the primary provider for his family. His father taught him everything he could, every hunting ground within 10 miles, every trap line, every place where game moved in winter. Jacques hunted every day. Squirrels, rabbits, muskrat, beaver when he could trap them, deer when he could find them. He used his father's rifle, his father's teachings, his father's philosophy. One shot, make it certain, never waste. Some days he came home with enough to feed them. Some days he came home with nothing and watched his mother divide impossibly small portions into 4 plates and pretend she'd already eaten. His sister, Marie-Claire, was 10. She never complained, never asked for more, but Jacques saw her ribs showing through her nightgown, saw the hollow places in her cheeks. The depression ground on. 1939, 1940, 1941. And then, December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. The world exploded into war. Jacques heard the news on the radio in the general store. He was 19, picking up cartridges for his rifle. 3 bullets, all they could afford that week. The storekeeper had the radio on. The announcer's voice crackled through static, but the words were clear enough. Japanese forces had attacked the American Pacific Fleet. Thousands dead. The United States was entering the war. Jacques stood frozen in the store, 3 brass cartridges in his palm. Canada had been at war for 2 years already, fighting in Europe, fighting in North Africa. The recruitment posters were everywhere. Your king and country need you. Join now. He'd ignored them. His family needed him more than King George did. But something shifted that December morning. Standing in the general store with 3 bullets in his hand, listening to descriptions of burning ships and dead sailors, his best friend, Etienne Moreau, found him an hour later, sitting on the bench outside the store, staring at nothing. Etienne was 22, a logger's son. They'd grown up together, hunted together, starved together during the worst Depression years. "You heard?" Jacques nodded. "We should go," Etienne said. "Enlist, both of us." "My family? Your sister's 13 now, old enough to help your mother. Your father can trap the close lines. They'll manage, Jacques, and the army pays. You can send money home." Jacques turned the 3 cartridges over in his palm. 3 bullets, 75 cents, a quarter each. That's what his family's survival came down to, 3 pieces of brass and lead. "When do you want to leave?" he asked. Etienne grinned. "Tomorrow." They enlisted in Quebec City in January 1942. Jacques was 21. Etienne was 22. They stood in line with 40 other men, farmers, loggers, miners, boys from the countryside who knew how to work, how to endure, how to do without. The recruiting sergeant was a veteran of the Great War. He looked them up and down with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. "You boys hunt?" "Yes, sir," Jacques said. "Good. We need men who can shoot, who don't waste ammunition, who understand patience." They signed their papers, took their oaths, became property of the Canadian Army. Jacques' mother cried when he told her. His father shook his hand hard and said nothing. Marie-Claire, 13 and trying to be brave, hugged him and whispered, "Come back, Jacques, promise me." He couldn't promise, but he held her tight and said, "I'll try." The Army issued them uniforms, boots, rifles, Lee Enfield No. 4 Mark Is, 10-round magazine capacity, bolt action, .303 British caliber. Jacques held the rifle and felt something familiar. The weight, the balance, the potential for precise violence. He'd been holding rifles since he was 8 years old. This one was newer, better maintained, but the principle was identical. Aim, breathe, squeeze, make it count. The Army sent them to basic training in Ontario, March through May 1942. They learned to march, to salute, to follow orders, to shoot in formation. Jacques excelled at shooting. During their first qualification, he scored 47 out of 50 at 300 yards. In rain, with a rifle he'd only been using for 2 months. The range instructor, a grizzled sergeant named Morrison, pulled him aside. "Where'd you learn to shoot, Delacroix?" "Quebec, Sergeant, hunting." "For sport?" "For food." Morrison studied him. "You shoot like a man who's been hungry." "I have been, Sergeant." Morrison nodded slowly. "Good. Hungry men don't waste bullets. Hungry men make certain of their shots. The Army needs men like you." But it was at Aldershot, England, in June 1944, that Jacques' real education began. The Canadian Forces had established a sniper training program at Aldershot, turning regular riflemen into specialized killers, men who could operate alone or in pairs, men who could eliminate targets at distances that made conventional infantry useless. Jacques wasn't selected for sniper school initially. He was just another corporal in just another infantry company preparing for the invasion of France. But on a rainy Thursday in June, everything changed. His company was running live fire exercises, shooting at targets at 500 yards in driving rain that made visibility a nightmare. Most men struggled to hit 30 out of 50. The rain played hell with aim. Wind pushed bullets off course. Water got in eyes, in sights, in mechanisms. Jacques stepped up to the firing line, studied the conditions, the wind, the rain angle, the way water beaded on the target frames. He fired 50 rounds, 49 hits, only one miss, and that was because the target frames shifted in the wind just as he squeezed the trigger. Warrant Officer Duncan MacLeod was observing the exercise. He was 38, a veteran of the Great War who'd lost a son at Normandy 3 weeks earlier. The kind of loss that turns men hard and focused. MacLeod approached Jacques after the exercise. "Delacroix, sir, you shoot like a man who's been hungry." It was the second time someone had said that to Jacques. He gave the same answer. "I have been, sir, during the Depression. If I missed the rabbit my family didn't eat, you learn to make the first shot count." MacLeod was silent for a long moment. Rain dripped off his cap, ran down his weathered face. "How would you like to learn to kill Germans at 800 yards? Jacques thought of his father, his mother, Marie Claire, Etienne, all the people he'd hunted for, all the patient hours waiting for the certain shot. "I'd be honored, sir." 3 days later, Jacques received orders to report to the Canadian Sniper Training Program at Vimy Barracks. Sniper school was different from anything Jacques had experienced. The instructors didn't teach shooting. Not really. They assumed you could already shoot. What they taught was patience beyond human endurance, improvisation with available materials, psychological impact on enemy morale. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Chambers taught the tactical psychology module. He was a small man with cold blue eyes and a voice that could cut steel. On the first day of class, he stood before 60 prospective snipers and delivered a speech Jacques would never forget. "Gentlemen, you are not merely rifles with legs. You are instruments of terror. The German army is professional, experienced, and well-trained. They can absorb casualties. What they cannot absorb is unpredictability. Your mission is to make them afraid of their own shadows. Make them question everything they see. Make them hesitate. In war, hesitation kills." He paused. Let the words settle. "You will learn to wait, for hours, for days if necessary. You will learn to become part of the landscape. You will learn to show the enemy what isn't there while hiding what is. Because the sniper who survives isn't the one with the best hide. It's the one who controls what the enemy believes they see. Jacques understood this instinctively. He'd been hunting deer that could detect a human heartbeat at 50 yards. He'd been outwitting animals with senses far superior to humans. He excelled at every aspect of training. Camouflage. He used techniques from trapping, understanding how animals saw the world, how predators detected prey. Stalking. He could move across open ground so slowly, so carefully, that observers with binoculars lost track of him. Concealment. He could disappear into terrain that seemed impossible to hide in. But it was the final examination that made McLeod certain he'd found something special. The test was simple. Remain concealed within 200 yards of instructors with binoculars for 12 hours. The instructors were veterans. They knew every trick. They'd seen thousands of students attempt this. Jacques prepared for 3 days. He studied the test area, the light, the angles, the patterns of observation. On test day, he covered himself in a mixture of frozen mud and marsh grass. Techniques from Quebec, trapping techniques. He found a drainage ditch 20 feet from the observation post, filled with icy water, uncomfortable, miserable, perfect. He submerged himself up to his nose, covered his face with mud and vegetation, controlled his breathing, slowed his heart rate, and waited. 12 hours passed. The instructors scanned constantly, methodically. They knew he was close. They could feel it. But they never saw him. After 23 hours, they declared him lost, a failure. They ended the exercise. Jacques stood up 15 feet from the observation post, water streaming off him, mud cracking on his face. The instructors stared. McLeod broke the silence. "How long have you been there?" "Since 0400, sir, before you took your positions." McLeod walked over to the drainage ditch, looked down at the impossible hiding spot, the freezing water, the perfect misery. He turned back to Jacques. "You have the patience of stone and the cunning of a weasel. These are compliments in our trade. But remember, the Germans are not stupid. They learn. The sniper who survives isn't the one with the best hide. It's the one who controls what the enemy thinks they're seeing." Jacques graduated top of his class in August 1944. Etienne Moreau, who'd enlisted with him back in Quebec, had volunteered for the same training. He didn't have Jacques' natural gifts for concealment, but he was smart, observant, loyal. He became Jacques' spotter, the second pair of eyes every sniper needed. They deployed to Northwest Europe as a team, brothers in everything but blood. For 6 months, they fought through France, through the flooded polders of the Netherlands, into the frozen forests of Germany. They were good at their work. 34 confirmed kills between them. Jacques 21, Etienne 13. They saved each other's lives a dozen times, moved through combat zones like ghosts, trusted each other absolutely. And then, February 19th, 1945, tragedy struck. The morning started normal as any morning could be when you were 300 yards from German positions in frozen forests that wanted to kill you. Jacques and Etienne were in a hide they'd constructed the previous night, observing German defensive positions near Monewood, mapping machine gun nests, documenting sniper locations, creating intelligence for the coming Canadian assault. Etienne had the binoculars. Jacques was sketching positions on a tactical map. They'd been doing this for 4 hours. Cold, hungry, alert. "I've got something," Etienne whispered. "Barn loft, 700 yards, northwest. Watch for movement." Jacques shifted his rifle, found the barn through his scope, studied it. Nothing, just a barn, damaged by artillery, most of the roof gone, but still providing cover. "I don't see—" "Wait, there. Did you see it?" Jacques had, just a flicker. Could have been a bird, could have been wind moving debris, could have been a German sniper. "Mark it," Jacques said. "Will—" Etienne shifted position, rising slightly to get a better angle with the binoculars, to confirm what he'd seen. He was exposed for 5 seconds, maybe 4. The shot came from the barn, 700 yards. The sound reached them a full second after the bullet did. Etienne jerked backward. The binoculars flew from his hands. He made a sound, not a scream, just a soft grunt of surprise. And then he collapsed. Jacques moved on pure instinct, grabbed Etienne, dragged him deeper into cover. His hands came away red, so much red. The bullet had entered just below Etienne's helmet, traveled through his brain. There was no exit wound. The bullet had stayed inside, doing catastrophic damage. Etienne's eyes were open, still conscious, still aware, but his body wasn't responding. Blood ran from his nose, from his ears. "Jacques!" His voice was a whisper, wet, failing. "Don't talk. Don't move. I'll get you back. The medics." "Non." Etienne's hand found Jacques' arm, gripped with surprising strength. "Listen. Save your strength. Listen." Blood bubbled at his lips. 700 yards. Barn loft. Northeast corner. He's good. Better than us. Jacques wanted to scream, wanted to rage, wanted to pick up his rifle and put 50 rounds through that barn until nothing lived inside it. But he didn't. Because Etienne was right. The German sniper was good. Moving now would mean dying. Dying wouldn't help Etienne, wouldn't avenge him, would just waste 2 lives instead of 1. So Jacques did the hardest thing he'd ever done. He lay still beside his dying best friend, and he observed. He studied the barn, the angles, the sight lines, the way afternoon light played across the damaged structure. He noted wind direction, distance markers, potential firing positions. He watched, and calculated, and memorized. Etienne died 3 minutes later, his hand still gripping Jacques' arm. His last words were in French, the Quebec French of their childhood. "Finir ça. Tu dois finir ça. Finish it. You must finish it." Jacques stayed in position for another hour, motionless beside his best friend's body, not from grief, not from shock, from tactical calculation. He was learning everything he could about the German who killed Etienne, learning his patterns, his discipline, his patience. Finally, as light began to fail, Jacques moved. He picked up Etienne's body, all 160 pounds of dead weight, and he carried him back to Canadian lines. It took 45 minutes, moving carefully, using cover. The body was heavy, unwieldy, but Jacques had carried deer through frozen marshes, had carried beaver through hip-deep snow. He could carry his friend home. Major Thomas Blackwood was waiting at company headquarters. He was 42, a career officer facing a crisis. He'd heard about the sniper casualty, was expecting Jacques to come back angry, demanding revenge, demanding artillery strikes on the barn. Instead, Jacques laid Etienne's body down gently, straightened, saluted. "Sir, I request permission to conduct independent sniper operations using experimental methods." Blackwood stared at him. "Experimental methods?" "Yes, sir." "What kind of experimental methods?" Jacques' face was empty of emotion, flat, cold. "The kind that make Germans curious, sir. Curious enough to investigate, curious enough to expose themselves, curious enough to die." Blackwood was facing mounting casualties from German snipers in the Monewood sector. 2 to 3 Canadians dead every day. The Germans held excellent defensive positions. Their snipers were professional, experienced, deadly. He was desperate enough to try anything. "You have 48 hours to demonstrate results, Corporal. After that, you're back to standard operations." Jacques saluted. "Thank you, sir." That night, Jacques sat alone in his dugout. He didn't sleep, didn't cry, didn't rage. He thought. The German sniper who killed Etienne was positioned perfectly. Excellent concealment in that barn, multiple firing positions, clear fields of fire. Jacques couldn't spot him with binoculars. Direct assault was suicide. Artillery would be wasted on a single sniper who could relocate. He needed to force the German to reveal himself. Without exposing himself, he needed something new, something unexpected, something Germans trained for professional warfare would never anticipate. As Jacques opened his evening ration, British Army tinned tomatoes heated over a tiny Tommy cooker, inspiration arrived in the form of morning light. He didn't recognize it yet. The idea was still forming, still gestating in the part of his brain that had learned to hunt in Quebec marshes, that had learned to trap muskrat and beaver, that had learned the value of waiting for absolute certainty. But it was there, waiting. The next morning, February 20th, Jacques made tea. The same routine he followed every morning, boiling water in a tin cup over a fuel tablet. The empty tomato tin sat near his position, discarded, useless, garbage. The rising sun hit it at an angle, and suddenly the tin glowed orange-red. Not bright, not obvious, but visible. It looked almost like a small fire, or a reflection from glass, or something that didn't quite belong in the frozen forest. Jacques stared at the tin, then at the German positions, then back at the tin. He picked it up, rotated it slowly. The orange glow moved, created patterns of light and shadow. His mind made connections, rapid-fire connections born from years of hunting, from understanding how prey animals thought, how they reacted to the unexpected. Glass and metal reflections were common on battlefields. Soldiers learned to ignore them, or use them to locate enemy positions. But what if reflections did something unexpected? What if they moved in ways that didn't make sense? What if they created patterns that demanded investigation? Jacques' hands moved automatically. He pulled out his combat knife, started punching holes in the tomato tin. Different sizes, different patterns. He held the tin up to the morning light, rotated it. The holes created spots of light that appeared and disappeared, that moved and danced. It looked wrong, not like equipment, not like anything a soldier would recognize, which meant German soldiers would have to investigate, would have to determine what it was, whether it was dangerous. Investigation meant exposure. Exposure meant death. 15 minutes later, Jacques was explaining his idea to Major Blackwood. "Sir, I want to use tin cans to manipulate German curiosity." Blackwood's face was skeptical. "Manipulate?" "Yes, sir. Germans trained to spot reflections from binoculars or scopes. They know what those look like. But if I punch holes in a tin and position it to catch sunlight, it creates patterns of light that look wrong. Not like equipment, not like anything they recognize. Their training says investigate unknown signatures. That investigation means exposure. That exposure means death." Blackwood studied Jacques' face, saw no emotion there. No rage, no grief, just cold calculation. "You realize this sounds insane?" "Yes, sir. The best ideas usually do." Blackwood approved the mission. Jacques would test the technique on targets of opportunity before attempting to kill the specific German sniper who'd killed Etienne. Jacques spent the rest of February 20th preparing. He collected more tomato tins, punched different patterns of holes in each one, developed a system using fishing line and small pulleys to adjust the tins remotely, to make them move, to make the light patterns shift and change. He scouted positions, calculated angles, determined where Germans would have clear sight lines to his decoys, where he would have clear sight lines to the Germans. He thought about Etienne, about Quebec, about patient hours in frozen marshes waiting for deer that might never come, about his father's voice teaching him that missing shots meant people went hungry. And he prepared to turn that Quebec discipline into something else entirely, into vengeance delivered with mathematical precision, into death disguised as curiosity, into a 4-day campaign that would kill 137 men who never knew they died because they couldn't resist solving a puzzle. As darkness fell on February 20th, Jacques sat in his dugout. The Lee Enfield lay across his lap. He broke it down. The familiar ritual: cleaning rod through the barrel, oil on the bolt, muscle memory from 1,000 repetitions. This is for you, Etienne, he thought. I will make them pay. Not with rage, with the patience we learned as boys, with the cunning father taught me, with the discipline that kept our families alive. I will make them afraid of light itself. Tomorrow the killing would begin. Tomorrow, Jacques Delacroix would become the ghost light. And the Germans would learn that sometimes the most dangerous weapons aren't the ones you can see coming. Sometimes they're the ones that make you curious. February 21st, 1945. Day 1, 06:45 hours. Jacques Delacroix had been in position for 3 hours, long enough for the pre-dawn cold to seep through every layer of clothing, long enough for his muscles to stiffen, long enough to become part of the landscape. He'd positioned 5 tomato tins the previous night, each one carefully placed, each one angled differently, each one connected to his position by fishing line scavenged from a supply depot, each one capable of being adjusted remotely. The setup was 40 yards ahead of his actual firing position, 70 degrees off axis from where he lay. Anyone investigating the tins would be focused forward, would never imagine the threat came from the flank. Through his scope, Jacques studied the German positions 600 yards distant, a concealed bunker entrance, sandbagged fighting positions, the professional defensive work of experienced soldiers. Somewhere in that network of trenches and bunkers was the German sniper who'd killed Etienne. Jacques hadn't forgotten, would never forget. But first he needed to prove his concept. Prove that curiosity could kill. The sun rose over the mownwood forest like a cold bronze coin. Weak winter light filtered through skeletal trees. And as that light touched Jacques' carefully positioned tomato tins, something remarkable happened. The leftmost tin caught the sun first. The crude holes Jacques had punched created a pattern. Spots of orange light appeared on the snow beyond the tin. Not bright, not obvious, just wrong enough to notice. Jacques pulled gently on the fishing line connected to that tin. It rotated 3 degrees. The light patterns shifted, danced, disappeared for 2 seconds, then reappeared in a slightly different configuration. Then darkness. Jacques counted to 5 in his head, adjusted the center tin using a different line. Orange glow, different pattern. The holes in this tin were larger, the light spots more scattered. 3 seconds. Darkness. The sequence repeated. Left tin. 3 seconds of light. 5 seconds of darkness. Center tin. 2 seconds of light. 7 seconds of darkness. Again and again. Through his scope, Jacques watched the German positions. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. He continued the sequence. Patient, methodical. The same discipline he'd learned in Quebec winters, when missing the shot meant his family went without. 30 minutes passed, then 45. The cold was brutal. Jacques' trigger finger was numb inside his glove. But he didn't move, didn't shift, didn't break concentration. At 08:17, 3 Germans emerged from the concealed bunker entrance. Jacques' heart rate didn't change. His breathing stayed controlled. This was what he'd been waiting for. The 3 Germans stood in a cluster. One was pointing at the tomato tins. One was raising binoculars. The third appeared to be taking notes. An officer, probably. Intelligence personnel documenting what they thought was a new Allied signaling method. They were 600 yards away, standing partially exposed, focused entirely on the mysterious light patterns ahead of them, not on the sniper positioned 70 degrees to their flank. Jacques settled his crosshairs on the soldier with the binoculars. Center mass, the heart-lung region. 600 yards was a long shot, but well within his capability. The wind was minimal, maybe 3 miles per hour from the west. He breathed in, breathed out. Halfway between breaths, he squeezed the trigger. The Lee Enfield spoke, the recoil familiar and comfortable against his shoulder. 600 yards away, the German with the binoculars jerked backward. Fell. Jacques worked the bolt. Smooth. Practiced. Thousands of repetitions had made the motion automatic. He acquired the officer who'd been taking notes. The man was turning, confused, not yet understanding the danger. Jacques fired again. 3 seconds after his first shot, the officer dropped. The third German dove for cover, disappeared back into the bunker entrance. He survived. 2 confirmed kills at 600 yards in 6 seconds. Jacques immediately began withdrawing, slowly, carefully, using the terrain. He left the tomato tins in place, still catching sunlight, still creating their mysterious patterns. 20 minutes later, German mortars saturated the area where the tomato tins were positioned. Over 40 rounds, high explosive. The tins vanished in the explosions. The Germans were trying to destroy whatever was creating the light patterns. But Jacques was 200 yards south by then, already selecting his next position, already planning the next sequence. The technique worked. Curiosity killed. Major Blackwood received Jacques' report at 1100 hours. 2 confirmed kills, sir. The technique is effective. Blackwood studied the younger man, looking for emotion, for satisfaction, for something human. He saw nothing but professional detachment. Explain exactly what happened. Jacques did, precisely, clinically, the tin placement, the light patterns, the German investigation, the flanking position, the double tap at 600 yards. Blackwood listened, his skepticism transforming into something else. Interest, calculation. Can you repeat this? Yes, sir, multiple times, with variations. How many more kills do you think you can achieve? Jacques was quiet for a moment, thinking, planning. If the weather holds clear for sunlight, and if the Germans don't adapt their tactics too quickly, I estimate 30 to 40 in 4 days. At that moment, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Stewart entered the briefing room. He was 48, a career officer. He'd seen action in the Great War as a young lieutenant. He understood innovation, understood that wars were won by men who thought differently. Corporal Delacroix. Jacques stood, saluted. Stewart paused, let the weight of his next words settle. Major Blackwood has briefed me on your unconventional approach. We have identified at least 20 German sniper positions in this sector. They are exceptionally skilled. We are losing men daily. If your technique can reduce those casualties, I will give you whatever resources you need. How many enemy do you think you can eliminate in 4 days? Jacques met his gaze. 30 to 40, sir. That assumes I can maintain unpredictability. The moment the Germans understand the pattern, they'll adapt. Stewart made his decision immediately. You have 4 days. I will assign you a dedicated security team of 6 men. Your only mission is to eliminate enemy snipers and observers using whatever methods achieve results. After 4 days, we assess whether to expand the program. Yes, sir. One more thing, Corporal. The German who killed your spotter, Private Moreau, do you intend to pursue him specifically? Jacques' face remained empty. That depends on whether he investigates my light patterns, sir. Stewart almost smiled. Almost. Dismissed. The afternoon of February 21st saw Jacques refining his technique. He punched different patterns of holes in 8 more tomato tins, some with large holes, some with small, some with holes clustered together, some with holes spread apart. Each tin would create a different light signature. Each one would look different to German observers. Each one would be a new puzzle demanding investigation. He painted some tins with mud to create contrast, dark sides and bright sides. The rotation would create a blinking effect, on-off, on-off. He developed a more sophisticated remote adjustment system, multiple fishing lines, small pulleys made from parachute cord and wire. He could now control 5 tins simultaneously from a single position. Create complex sequences, patterns that look like communication. His security team arrived at 1500 hours. 6 men, all experienced infantry, all volunteers. The team leader was a sergeant named William Price, 32 years old, from Alberta. He'd been at Dieppe, had seen things that aged men prematurely. "Corporal Delacroix, we're here to keep you alive while you do whatever it is you're planning to do." Jacques briefed them, showed them the tomato tins, explained the concept. Price's face went through several expressions: disbelief, confusion, understanding, respect. "You're going to kill Germans with garbage and sunlight." "That's the plan, Sergeant." Price laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound. "I've seen a lot of crazy shit in this war, but this might be the craziest that actually makes sense." The security team's job was simple: provide perimeter defense, watch for German counter-sniper teams, help with positioning and withdrawal, carry equipment. They were not there to shoot. That was Jacques' job. By evening, Jacques had identified 9 primary shooting positions, each one with clear sight lines to known German positions, each one 300 to 800 yards from enemy lines, each one with multiple routes for approach and withdrawal. He memorized them: elevations, wind patterns, background terrain, escape routes, everything. The evening briefing with Lieutenant Colonel Stewart drew unexpected attention. Word had spread about the morning's kills, about the tin can technique. Officers wanted to know more. Stewart kept it brief. "Corporal Delacroix achieved 2 confirmed kills this morning using improvised deception devices. He has 3 more days to demonstrate full effectiveness. Questions will wait until after assessment." But Stewart pulled Jacques aside after the briefing. "The regiment commander, Colonel Harrison, is watching this personally. Success here could change doctrine across the entire 1st Canadian Army. Don't let the pressure affect your work." "External pressure is easier than internal discipline, sir." Stewart studied him. "You're not doing this for glory, are you?" "No, sir." "For your friend, Moreau?" Jacques was silent for 5 seconds. "For all of us, sir. Every day these German snipers operate, more Canadians die. If I can make them afraid to look, afraid to observe, afraid to do their jobs, that saves lives. Even German lives, eventually. Sir, if they withdraw, if they refuse to investigate, if they become ineffective, their commanders will pull them from the line, send them elsewhere. War ends sooner for everyone." Jacques nodded slowly. He hadn't thought of it that way, but Stewart was right. Psychological warfare wasn't just about killing. It was about making the enemy stop fighting. February 21st ended with 9 more confirmed kills. Jacques had moved positions 3 times throughout the afternoon, created different light patterns in different locations. Each time Germans investigated, each time they died. By nightfall, 11 Germans had fallen on day 1. Sergeant Price found Jacques cleaning his weapon as darkness settled. The Lee Enfield lay across his lap. Jacques worked the cleaning rod through the barrel with practiced efficiency. "You're different from other snipers I've met." Jacques didn't look up from his work. "How so?" "Most snipers are angry, or cold, or damaged. You're just focused, like you're solving a math problem instead of killing men." Jacques thought about that. "In Quebec, when I hunted, I never hated the deer, or the rabbit, or the beaver. They were food, necessary for survival. Hating them would be stupid. Emotions waste energy, make you impatient. Impatience causes mistakes." "So you don't hate the Germans?" "No, I respect them. They're professional soldiers doing their job. That's what makes this work. If they were undisciplined, curiosity wouldn't kill them. But they're trained to investigate unknowns, trained to gather intelligence, trained to document threats. That training is their weakness." Price was quiet for a moment. "That's cold, Corporal." "War is cold, Sergeant." Day 2, February 22nd, 09:45 hours. Jacques had been planning this since the previous evening. Today wasn't about random German soldiers. Today was about the barn, about the sniper who'd killed Etienne. The German sniper was exceptional. Jacques knew this from observation, from study. The barn was 700 yards northeast of Canadian forward positions. Stone construction, most of the roof destroyed by earlier artillery, but enough structure remained to provide cover. The German had at least 4 different firing positions inside. Jacques had watched the previous day, noted muzzle flash locations from other engagements. The German never fired more than twice from the same spot. He understood counter-sniper tactics, understood that patterns meant death. Standard tomato tin tricks wouldn't work on this professional. He was too experienced, too disciplined. He wouldn't investigate random light patterns. Jacques needed something more sophisticated, something this particular German couldn't ignore. The solution came from understanding German sniper doctrine. They weren't just killers, they were intelligence gatherers. They documented Allied movements, equipment, preparations. They were the eyes of their regiment. What would force a professional intelligence gatherer to break cover? Artillery spotting. If Jacques could make the German believe Canadian forward observers were preparing artillery fire missions, the German would have to document it, would have to observe, would have to attempt to kill the observers if possible. Artillery observers were priority targets. Their death could prevent devastating bombardments. Jacques positioned his security team to act as fake forward observers. They had radio equipment, surveying tools, maps, binoculars. They moved conspicuously, measured distances, aimed instruments at German positions, consulted maps loudly enough for voices to carry. And Jacques positioned his tomato tins to create light patterns that appeared to communicate between the fake observers and rear positions. Flash patterns, seemingly coordinated, seemingly transmitting grid coordinates. Jacques himself was 500 yards west of the fake observer position. Perfect angle to the barn, perfect sightline. He'd spent 2 hours before dawn getting into position, building a hide that made him invisible. Now he waited. The security team performed beautifully. Sergeant Price acted as the lead observer, pointing at German positions, measuring angles with surveying equipment, calling out fake coordinates to other team members. Jacques' tomato tins created their light patterns, seemingly confirming communications, seemingly transmitting information. It was theater, elaborate deception, and the German in the barn was watching. Jacques knew this, could feel it, the way a deer knows when a predator's eyes are on it. 2 hours passed. Jacques' fingers went numb. His legs cramped. The February cold was brutal, but he'd been cold before, in Quebec, waiting for game in conditions that would kill careless men. At 11:47, movement. Subtle. A window shutter in the barn, northeast corner. It opened 3 inches, no more. Jacques saw it through his scope, marked the position, did not move. At 11:53, light glinted inside the barn, just for a fraction of a second. Glass, a scope or binoculars catching sunlight. The German sniper was observing the fake artillery spotters. Jacques made microscopic adjustments to his aim, breathing controlled, heart rate slowed. He calculated. Range, 735 yards. Wind, 6 miles per hour from the west. Temperature, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity, low. He would need to hold 18 inches left and 24 inches high to compensate. At 11:56, the German sniper shifted position inside the barn. For exactly 2 seconds, his face was visible in the window opening. A dark shape against darker background, barely distinguishable. Jacques fired. The bullet crossed 735 yards in approximately 2.5 seconds. The trajectory was a perfect arc, compensating for wind, for gravity, for air density. Through his scope, Jacques saw the impact. The figure in the window jerked backward, collapsed into the barn interior. No second shot, no confirmation. Jacques immediately began withdrawing, slowly, methodically. The security team had already started their withdrawal. The theater was over. The German in the barn didn't return fire, didn't move, didn't breathe. The next day, Canadian patrols searching the barn found extensive sniper equipment, a detailed log documenting German operations, 37 Canadian casualties recorded, and the body of Oberfeldwebel Klaus Richter, age 32, Eastern Front veteran, 3 years combat experience, one of the best snipers in the Wehrmacht. Dead because he couldn't ignore potential artillery spotters. Jacques received the confirmation that evening. Among Richter's personal effects was a photograph, a woman and 2 young daughters, his family. Jacques stared at the photograph for a long time. The woman looked tired. The girls looked happy. One was maybe 7, one was maybe 5. Richter had a family, a wife, 2 daughters in that photograph. They would grow up fatherless because Jacques had been patient at 735 yards. He felt no satisfaction, no closure. Etienne was still dead. Richter's death didn't change that. It just meant 2 more girls would grow up without fathers. "That's for you, Etienne," he said quietly, to no one, to his dead friend. "That one was for you." But the weight of it settled on him like the February cold, heavy, inescapable. Day 2 ended with 41 total confirmed kills, the barn sniper, plus 40 others who'd investigated Jacques' various light patterns throughout the day. The Germans were beginning to understand something was wrong. Captured German documents from February 22nd revealed the enemy's confusion. One diary entry found on the body of Gefreiter Hans Müller, age 19. "The Canadians have new signals we don't understand, lights that appear and disappear. Oberfeldwebel Richter is dead. 7 men in my company killed investigating the lights. Officers say we must document these signals, but documentation means exposure. I watch the lights now, watch them dance. I see them when I close my eyes. I no longer know what is real and what is the Canadian ghost." Oberst Wilhelm Brenner, the German regimental commander, wrote in his war diary, "Enemy employs unknown signaling methods with light devices. Our attempts to document these signals result in casualties. Sniper fire of extraordinary precision eliminates all observers. Unable to determine if signals are genuine tactical communication or elaborate deception. Lost Oberfeldwebel Richter today, one of our best. Morale declining. Men fear investigating anything unusual." The psychological impact was already exceeding the casualty figures. Jacques read the translated documents that evening. Major Blackwood showed them to him. "You're not just killing them, Corporal. You're making them afraid. Afraid of light. Afraid of investigating. Afraid to do their jobs." Jacques nodded. "That's the goal, sir. Dead soldiers can be replaced. Frightened soldiers are worse than useless. They spread fear. They make others hesitate. Hesitation kills." "You're quoting Lieutenant Colonel Chambers from sniper school." "He was right, sir." Blackwood studied him. "Tomorrow the Germans will adapt. They'll issue orders. Don't investigate unusual phenomena. Your technique becomes less effective." Jacques had anticipated this. "Then I escalate, sir. If they won't investigate random lights, I create lights they can't afford to ignore." "How?" "Make the patterns look like genuine tactical communication. Grid coordinates, timing sequences, unit identifications. Things their intelligence officers must document, must verify, must report to higher command." Blackwood leaned back. "You've thought this through." "Planning is half the battle, sir. The other half is execution." Day 3, February 23rd, the Adaptation War. Jacques' prediction was correct. The Germans had issued new orders overnight. Captured prisoners confirmed it during interrogation. "Do not investigate unusual light phenomena. Report them through proper channels, but do not expose yourselves." The order came directly from Oberst Brenner, theater-wide for his regiment. For the first 3 hours of February 23rd, Jacques achieved 0 kills. His tomato tin patterns were ignored. Germans saw them, reported them, but didn't investigate. The technique was suddenly ineffective. Sergeant Price found Jacques at 1000 hours. "They've adapted," What now? Jacques was already implementing Phase 2, 12 tomato tins instead of 5 or 6, positioned in a complex network, each one carefully angled, each one creating specific patterns. And the patterns weren't random. They simulated coordinated signal communication. The leftmost tin would flash a sequence, 3 long, 2 short, 1 long. The center tin would respond, 1 short, 3 long. The right tin would confirm, 2 short. It looked like grid coordinates being transmitted, north-south designations, east-west confirmations, elevation data. It looked like Canadian forces preparing for a major assault. Coordinating units, transmitting attack times, designating objectives. German intelligence couldn't ignore this. Orders or no orders. If there was even a possibility these signals were genuine, they had to document them, had to verify, had to report to command. Investigation became mandatory despite standing orders, and investigation meant exposure. By 1400 hours, Jacques had achieved 34 confirmed kills. Reconnaissance teams sent to verify the signals, killed. Officers attempting to coordinate responses, killed. Observers trying to document the patterns for intelligence reports, killed. Every investigation ended the same way. A precisely placed shot from an unseen sniper operating from angles the Germans never anticipated. Oberst Brenner's diary entry for February 23rd was increasingly desperate. Cannot determine if enemy signals are genuine or deception. Must verify to prevent potential disaster if attack is real. But verification results in casualties. Lost 34 men today, 41 yesterday. Sniper of extraordinary skill is destroying our ability to observe. Request guidance from Division Command. Defensive coordination collapsing. The guidance never came, or if it did, it didn't help. Because Jacques was operating inside the German decision loop, creating situations where every choice was wrong. Investigate and die. Ignore and potentially miss critical intelligence. Paralysis through impossible decisions. The highest concentration of IS-3 came during a German repositioning attempt. At 1500 hours, German forces began shifting defensive positions, moving machine gun nests, repositioning mortar teams, standard tactical adjustment. But to coordinate this repositioning, German officers had to move between positions, had to expose themselves to direct troop movements, had to be visible. Jacques had positioned his tomato tins to suggest Canadian forces were preparing to exploit exactly this kind of defensive shift. The light patterns implied Canadian observers were documenting the German movements, coordinating counterattacks. German officers had to know if this was true, had to verify whether Canadian forces were actually observing, actually preparing to attack during the vulnerable repositioning. 4 German officers exposed themselves, attempting to verify the situation. All 4 died. The German repositioning descended into chaos. Units didn't know where to move. Junior NCOs tried to take command, but lacked authority. The entire defensive sector's cohesion collapsed for 90 minutes. By the time German command restored order, they'd lost 18 men, 4 officers, 14 enlisted. Not from Canadian assault, from German soldiers investigating light patterns that might or might not be real. Day 3 ended with 34 confirmed kills, Jacques' highest single-day total. But he felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just professional assessment of effectiveness. Sergeant Price approached him at evening meal. The security team was exhausted. They'd moved positions 11 times throughout the day, providing cover, watching angles, helping Jacques relocate between shooting positions. "Corporal, we're winning. The Germans are falling apart." Jacques' rifle lay across his lap. He worked oil into the bolt mechanism, hands moving through practiced motions while his mind was elsewhere. "We're not winning, Sergeant. We're surviving. Winning comes later, after enough Germans die that their command pulls them from the line." "You don't celebrate the kills?" "No. Every man I kill is someone's son, maybe husband, maybe father. They're not evil. They're just German. If I'd been born in Hamburg instead of Quebec, I might be the one in that barn, and some German sniper might be using clever tricks to kill me. Price was quiet for a long moment. That's a strange way to think about the enemy. It's a realistic way. Hatred is easy. Understanding is hard. But understanding makes me more effective. If I understand how they think, I can predict how they'll respond. Prediction means control. Control means survival. Where'd you learn to think like that? Hunting deer in Quebec. The best hunters don't hate deer. They understand deer. Understand their behavior, their patterns, their fears. Understanding is how you feed your family when food is scarce. Price nodded slowly, started to say something, stopped. Jacques knew what he wanted to ask. Whether this was still about feeding families, whether Jacques was still the hungry boy from Quebec or something else now. Jacques didn't have an answer. Day 4, February 26th, the final day. Jacques woke at 0400 to discover nature had betrayed him. Fog, thick, heavy fog, rolling through the Moenwood forest like a living thing. Visibility was 50 yards maximum. The sun, when it rose, would be completely obscured. No sunlight meant no tomato tin technique. Sergeant Price found Jacques studying the fog. What do we do? Jacques didn't hesitate. He'd been planning for this contingency since day 2. We adapt. If light doesn't work, we use sound. Empty jerry cans, fuel containers, everywhere in a war zone. Jacques collected 17 of them in 30 minutes. His security team helped. He filled each can with small rocks, pebbles, anything that would rattle when shaken. Then he hung the jerry cans on stakes, in trees, across the same ground where his tomato tins had operated. Same deception, different sense. The fishing line system still worked. Jacques could shake the cans remotely, create metallic rattling sounds that carried through the fog, sounds that resembled equipment being moved, weapons being loaded, vehicles maneuvering. The principle was identical. Create something that demands investigation. Investigation means exposure. Exposure means death. By 0800, the system was operational. Jacques began the acoustic warfare. A jerry can would rattle for 3 seconds, then silence. Then another can 200 yards away would rattle, then a third. It sounded like Canadian forces infiltrating, moving equipment, preparing assault positions. German forces couldn't see through the fog, but they could hear. And what they heard demanded investigation. Throughout the morning, German troops emerged from positions to investigate the sounds, to verify whether Canadians were infiltrating, to prevent potential surprise attacks. Jacques killed 14 men before noon. The technique worked differently than the light patterns. Sound was less precise. Germans couldn't pinpoint source locations as easily, which meant they searched wider areas, which meant more exposure. At 14-15 hours, the moment that would be remembered in Canadian tactical doctrine occurred. The fog had partially lifted. Visibility improved to 300 yards. German forces, believing Canadian attack was imminent based on the mysterious sounds, began a major defensive repositioning. This required officers to move between positions, to coordinate, to lead. Jacques had positioned 8 jerry cans to create the impression Canadian forces were moving along the entire front, north to south, creating a line of acoustic signatures that suggested battalion-level assault preparation. German officers emerged to coordinate response, to organize defensive fires, to communicate with supporting units. For 3 hours, Jacques engaged targets of opportunity with brutal efficiency. 17 Germans fell. 4 were officers, including one major whose death created command paralysis that would affect the German defensive sector for 48 hours. The final kill came at 15:35, a German officer investigating jerry can sounds near his position. He stood partially exposed for 8 seconds, studying the area where the sounds originated, trying to determine if Canadian infantry were actually present or if this was another deception. Jacques' shot at 680 yards struck him center mass. The officer dropped. At 1600 hours, exactly 4 days after beginning the tomato tin operation, Jacques withdrew from forward positions. His count for the day stood at 51 confirmed kills. The 4-day total, 137. Jacques assembled the breakdown in his mind. Day 1, 11 confirmed kills. Day 2, 41 confirmed kills, including Oberfeld-Weibel, Richter. Day 3, 34 confirmed kills. Day 4, 51 confirmed kills using acoustic deception. Total, 137 confirmed enemy casualties. Observers had verified 119. The 4-day operation was complete. That evening, the intelligence assessment was filed. The language was clinical, professional, but it couldn't disguise the significance. Summary: Corporal Delacroix employed innovative psychological warfare techniques to neutralize enemy positions with unprecedented effectiveness. Using improvised light and sound devices, he forced enemy personnel to expose themselves for observation and targeting. Results: 137 confirmed enemy casualties, 73 verified as sniper, observer, or intelligence personnel. 21 confirmed as officers or senior non-commissioned officers. Estimated 500 enemy man-hours wasted investigating false signatures. Enemy intelligence gathering capability degraded by approximately 70 to 80%. Psychological impact on enemy morale, severe. German defensive coordination, disrupted. Recommendation, immediate promotion. Decoration, reassignment to training duties. Methodology merits urgent documentation for wider implementation. The German reaction revealed the operation's true psychological impact. Oberst Brenner's final diary entry before his unit was withdrawn from the line. The Canadian ghost sniper has destroyed my regiment's effectiveness. 51 men killed today, 137 total in 4 days investigating inexplicable phenomena that appear and disappear. Officers terrified to expose themselves. Soldiers refuse reconnaissance missions. Men reporting hallucinations of lights and sounds. Defensive posture collapsed. Cannot maintain sector control under these conditions. Request immediate relief. A separate German intelligence assessment attempted to analyze the situation. Enemy has developed sophisticated sniper tactics employing advanced deception methods. Light signals and acoustic devices draw our forces into prepared ambush zones. Conventional counter-sniper doctrine proves ineffective. Recommend all units enforce absolute discipline regarding investigation of unusual phenomena. Any unexplained light or sound must be reported through chain of command, but not investigated by forward personnel. This directive supersedes all previous intelligence gathering protocols. Jacques read these documents 2 days later. His face showed nothing. Major Blackwood was present. You didn't just defeat them, Corporal. You changed their doctrine. Theater-wide. That's strategic impact from tactical innovation. Yes, sir. How do you feel? Jacques was silent for a long moment. Tired, sir. Very tired. And he was. Not physically, though his body ached from 4 days of constant tension, but mentally, spiritually. Something in him had been spent, used up, consumed by 4 days of professional killing. He'd achieved his objective, exceeded it dramatically, created tactical innovation that would be studied for decades. But Etienne was still dead, and 137 Germans were dead. And Jacques Delacroix wondered, in the quiet moments before sleep, whether any amount of tactical brilliance was worth what it cost the soul to achieve it. Tomorrow would bring recognition, promotion, new orders. But tonight he sat alone in his dugout and thought about frozen marshes in Quebec, about patient hours waiting for deer, about his father's voice teaching him that missing meant going hungry. and he wondered if he'd used up all his patience. All the discipline that had kept his family alive during the Depression. All the parts of himself that remembered what it was like to hunt for food instead of killing for war. The ghost light had achieved its mission, but Jacques Delacroix wasn't sure who he was anymore. That question would take the rest of his life to answer. February 27th, 1945, 0900 hours. Jacques Delacroix sat in Major Blackwood's office. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw orange light patterns dancing on snow, heard the crack of his rifle, saw figures dropping 600 yards away. 137 figures. 137 men who would never go home. Blackwood slid a document across the desk. Official, typed, stamped with multiple authorization signatures. The intelligence assessment. Read it. Jacques read. The clinical language, the statistics, the recommendations. It was all there. Everything he'd accomplished. Reduced to numbers in tactical terminology. 137 confirmed kills. 73 verified as sniper, observer, or intelligence personnel. 21 officers or senior non-commissioned officers. Enemy intelligence capability degraded 70 to 80%. Psychological impact, severe. German defensive coordination, disrupted. He finished reading, looked up at Blackwood. Sir, Blackwood leaned forward. Do you understand what you've accomplished? This isn't just successful operations. This is doctrine change. Lieutenant Colonel Stewart has already sent your after-action report to 1st Canadian Army Headquarters. General Crerar himself wants a briefing. Jacques said nothing. You're being promoted to sergeant, effective immediately. You're being recommended for the Distinguished Conduct Medal, and you're being reassigned to the Canadian Army Training Center at Aldershot. As an instructor, I'm being pulled from the line, sir? You're being elevated, Corporal. Sorry, Sergeant. Your value now is in teaching others what you've developed, multiplying your effectiveness across the entire Army. Jacques looked down at his hands. They were steady. They shouldn't be steady. They should shake, should show some sign of what they'd done. But they were just hands. A hunter's hands, a trapper's hands, a killer's hands. When do I leave, sir? 3 weeks. You need rest first. Medical says you're exhibiting signs of acute combat fatigue. 4 days of constant high-stress operations. Operating alone in forward positions. Maintaining absolute concentration for hours at a time. It's extracted a toll. I'm fine, sir. You're not, but you will be. 3 weeks recovery, then Aldershot. That's an order. Yes, sir. Blackwood stood, extended his hand. What you did will save lives, Sergeant. Canadian lives. Remember that when the nightmares come. Jacques shook his hand, said nothing, because he knew the nightmares were already here. The medical officer was a captain named Morrison, 42 years old. He'd been a civilian psychiatrist before the war. Now he treated combat fatigue, shell shock, the invisible wounds that didn't bleed, but killed just as surely. Sit down, Sergeant Delacroix. Jacques sat. The medical tent was warm, too warm. He'd gotten used to the cold. Morrison reviewed his notes. You've been operating in forward positions for 4 consecutive days. Alone mostly, high stress, extreme concentration, multiple kills per day. Tell me how you're sleeping. I'm not, sir. Nightmares? Yes. Describe them. Jacques was silent for a moment, deciding how much to reveal, how much to keep private. I see lights, orange patterns. They move and shift. And when I follow them, I see faces. German faces, young faces, old faces. They all look the same after they're dead. Morrison wrote notes. Are you experiencing guilt? No, sir. No? Guilt would mean I think I did something wrong. I didn't. I followed orders, developed effective tactics, achieved mission objectives. The Germans I killed would have killed Canadians if I hadn't killed them first. That's war. That's the job. Morrison set down his pen. That's a very rational answer, Sergeant. Almost too rational. I'm a rational person, sir. Or you're separating yourself from the emotional impact of your actions. That works short term, but long term those barriers break down. The emotions surface, usually at bad times, in bad ways. Jacques met his gaze. Are you telling me I'm broken, sir? I'm telling you that you're human, that killing 137 men in 4 days, no matter how professionally, no matter how necessarily, leaves marks. Those marks don't make you weak, they make you human. What do you recommend, sir? Rest, time away from the line. Talk to someone when those barriers start breaking down, which they will. And remember that the men you killed aren't your responsibility. The war is responsible. The circumstances are responsible. You're just a soldier doing his duty. Jacques nodded, but he didn't believe it. Because he'd created those circumstances. He'd innovated. He'd turned tomato tins into weapons. He'd made Germans curious enough to die. The responsibility was his, and his alone. 3 days later, Jacques began writing the manual. Canadian Army headquarters wanted detailed documentation. Everything. The technique, the psychology, the variations, the limitations. Jacques sat in a dugout with paper and pencil, and he wrote. The document would eventually be titled Employment of Improvised Deception Devices in Counter-Sniper Operations, Lessons from the Rhineland Campaign. It began with philosophy. The tomato tin technique succeeds because it exploits enemy training against them. German forces are disciplined to observe, document, and respond to tactical signatures. By creating false signatures that mimic legitimate tactical activity, we force response cycles that expose them to fire. The critical element is understanding what the enemy cannot afford to ignore. A random light means nothing. A light pattern that suggests artillery spotting, attack coordination, or infiltration guidance cannot be ignored without accepting unacceptable risk. We weaponize their professionalism against them. Jacques wrote for 6 hours, describing every variation, every technique, every psychological principle, how to punch holes in tins for different light patterns, how to position them for maximum deception, how to adjust them remotely, how to coordinate false signatures with fake tactical activities, how to shift from visual to acoustic deception, how to create sounds that demanded investigation, how to position yourself off-axis so Germans focused on decoys instead of you, how to maintain discipline for hours, how to control breathing, how to wait for the certain shot, how to never waste ammunition on uncertain targets. The manual ended with warnings. This technique works because of unpredictability. The moment it becomes predictable, the enemy adapts. Use it sparingly, vary it constantly, always create new puzzles, because the Germans learn, and they learn quickly. Major Blackwood read the draft, made few changes, sent it up the chain of command. Within 2 weeks, it was being distributed to every sniper unit in the 1st Canadian Army. Within a month, similar techniques were being employed across the entire Western Front. British snipers, Canadian snipers, even some American units adopted variations. Supply officers began issuing polished metal plates specifically designed for light reflection. Officially designated Deception Devices Mark I. Jacques Delacroix had changed tactical doctrine, changed how modern armies thought about deception, changed warfare itself in a small but significant way. And he felt nothing but tired. Sergeant William Price found Jacques on the evening of March 3rd. Jacques was sitting alone outside his dugout, staring at nothing. Mind if I sit? Jacques gestured to the empty space beside him. Price settled down, pulled out a cigarette, offered one to Jacques. I don't smoke. Smart man. Price lit his cigarette, exhaled slowly. We're being reassigned, the security team, back to regular infantry operations. Good, you'll be safer. Price laughed. short and bitter. Safer, right. We spent 4 days with you watching you kill 137 Germans with garbage and sunlight. Nothing about this war feels safe anymore. They sat in silence for a moment. Can I ask you something? Price said. Yes. Do you regret it? Any of it? Jacques was quiet, thinking, being honest. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Etienne died. I regret that 137 Germans had to die to make other Germans afraid. But do I regret doing my duty? No. Regret would mean I had better options. I didn't. You ever wonder about them? The Germans you killed? Who they were? Every day. Price looked surprised. Really? I found a photograph. Klaus Richter and his family. A wife, 2 daughters. Those girls will grow up without a father because I put a bullet through his head at 735 yards. He killed Etienne. Yes, and I killed him. And both our families suffer. War forced me to kill. That was duty. But duty doesn't transform killing into something righteous. Necessary and good are not the same word. Price finished his cigarette, ground it out carefully. That's a dark way to see the world. It's an honest way. You think we're winning? The war? Jacques looked toward the German lines, invisible in the darkness, but there, always there. Yes, we're winning. Germany can't replace losses fast enough, can't maintain supply lines, can't sustain. Another few months, maybe a year, then it's over. And then what? Then we go home, try to forget, try to live normal lives, try to be the men we were before we learned how to kill efficiently. You think that's possible? Jacques didn't answer, because he didn't know. March 19th, 1945. Jacques received new orders. Report to Canadian Army Training Center, Aldershot, England. Duty assignment, sniper instructor, effective immediately. He packed his equipment. The Lee Enfield rifle that had served him so well, the scope, the ammunition pouches, his personal effects, everything fit in a single rucksack. Warrant Officer Duncan MacLeod came to see him off, the officer who'd first recognized Jacques' talent, who'd pushed him toward sniper training. You did well, son. Thank you, sir. I heard about the tomato tins, about the 137, about the doctrine change. MacLeod shook his head. When I pulled you out of that firing line exercise, I knew you could shoot. I didn't know you could think like that. You taught me, sir. You said, show the enemy what isn't there. That's what I did. You took it further than I ever imagined. MacLeod's face was serious, lined with age and loss. But be careful, Jacques. Men who innovate that way, men who think that creatively about killing, sometimes they lose part of themselves. Sometimes they forget how to turn it off. Jacques understood. How do I prevent that, sir? You remember why you did it. You did it to save Canadian lives. You did it for Etienne. You did it because you're a soldier, and soldiers follow orders. You didn't do it because you enjoy killing. The moment you start enjoying it, you've lost. You understand? Yes, sir. MacLeod gripped his shoulder, hard. You're a good man, Jacques. Don't let the war make you forget that. Aldershot was different from the front. Safer, quieter, no artillery, no constant threat of death. Jacques found it harder to sleep there than he had in the forward positions. The training center assigned him to the advanced sniper course, teaching soldiers who'd already completed basic sniper training, teaching them the next level, the psychological level. His first class was 24 men, all experienced, all with multiple confirmed kills. Jacques stood before them in the classroom, late March sunshine streaming through windows, everything peaceful, everything safe, everything wrong. My name is Sergeant Jacques Delacroix. I recently completed operations in the Rhineland sector. 137 confirmed enemy casualties in 4 days using improvised deception techniques. You're here to learn how I did it. The students shifted, interested, alert. But before we discuss technique, we discuss philosophy. Because technique without philosophy is just mechanics. And mechanics don't win wars. Understanding wins wars. Jacques picked up a tomato tin from the desk, one he'd saved, holes punched through it. This killed 17 Germans. It's garbage. It's trash. It cost nothing. But combined with understanding, with discipline, with knowledge of enemy psychology, it became a weapon. He set it down. Here's what you need to understand. Your enemy is not stupid. The German army is professional, experienced, well-trained. If you try to beat them at their own game, with their own methods, you'll lose. They're better at conventional warfare than you are. They've been doing it longer. Jacques paused, made eye contact with each student. So you don't play their game, you change the game. You make them play a game they've never trained for. A game where their training becomes a weakness, where their professionalism works against them. For 6 hours that first day, Jacques taught not just the mechanics of the tomato tin technique, but the thinking behind it, the psychology, the understanding of human nature that made it work. He taught them that curiosity was a weapon, that confusion was a weapon, that making the enemy think was more valuable than making them bleed. A dead soldier can be replaced, he said. A confused soldier makes everyone around him confused. A frightened soldier makes everyone around him frightened. Kill one German, you remove one soldier. Terrify one German, you remove a dozen. The students took notes, asked questions, learned. And Jacques realized something. He was good at this. Teaching, passing knowledge to others, multiplying his effectiveness through other men's actions. By April, he'd trained 60 soldiers. By May, 180, all Commonwealth, British, Canadian, some Australian, some New Zealand. They went to the front, applied what he'd taught, achieved results. Reports came back, kills, disruptions, German units withdrawing rather than face unpredictable snipers, using techniques they couldn't counter. Jacques' innovation was spreading, evolving. Other snipers were developing their own variations, creating new puzzles, new deceptions. The war was ending. Everyone could feel it. Germany was collapsing. The Reich that was supposed to last 1,000 years was dying after 12. On April 30th, Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. On May 7th, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. Jacques Delacroix learned about the surrender in the instructor's mess. Someone turned on the radio. The announcement came through static and distance. Germany had surrendered. The fighting was over. Men cheered, hugged each other, cried, celebrated. Jacques sat quietly, felt nothing. It was over. The killing, the war, all of it. But Etienne was still dead. And 137 Germans were still dead. And all the celebrations in the world wouldn't change that. Warrant Officer McLeod found him that evening, sitting alone outside the barracks, watching the sun set. "You should be celebrating, son." "I know, sir." "But you're not." "No, sir." McLeod sat beside him, 2 soldiers, 2 men who'd seen too much. "You know what the hardest part is?" McLeod said. "After the war, it's not adjusting to peace. It's forgiving yourself for surviving when others didn't." Jacques looked at him. "Is that possible? Forgiveness?" "I don't know. I lost my son at Normandy. Still haven't forgiven myself for surviving him. But I keep trying. That's all we can do. Keep trying." They sat in silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon. The war was over, but for men like Jacques Delacroix, some wars never end. April 1945. Official recognition came through. Sergeant Jacques Delacroix was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and exceptional initiative while serving as a scout sniper, Sergeant Delacroix employed extraordinary tactical innovation to neutralize enemy positions with devastating effectiveness, demonstrating the highest standards of courage, creativity, and devotion to duty. His actions resulted in 137 confirmed enemy casualties and contributed significantly to the degradation of enemy defensive capabilities in the Rhineland sector. There was a ceremony, officers, speeches, photographs. Jacques stood at attention while Lieutenant Colonel Stewart pinned the medal to his uniform, shook hands, saluted, and felt like a fraud. Because courage meant being afraid and acting anyway. He hadn't been afraid. He'd been cold, calculating, professional. That wasn't courage. That was just being good at killing. But he accepted the medal, because refusing it would dishonor the men who'd supported him. Sergeant Price and the security team, Major Blackwood, Stewart, all of them. So he wore the medal and said nothing about how it felt. Jacques remained in the Army until June 1949. 4 more years of service, all in training roles, teaching snipers, developing doctrine, consulting on tactical innovation. He was good at it, respected, valued. But every day he thought about going home, about Quebec, about the Yamaska River marshes, about hunting for food instead of hunting men. In June 49, he received his discharge papers. Honorable, full benefits, recommendations for civilian employment if he wanted them. He didn't want them. He wanted to go home. Rivière-du-Loup, Quebec, summer 1949. Jacques Delacroix stepped off the train in the town where he'd grown up. 8 years since he'd left. 8 years of war and killing and learning things no man should have to learn. His mother was waiting on the platform, older, grayer, still strong. She saw him, ran to him, hugged him hard enough to hurt. "Jacques, mon fils, my son, you came home." His father was there too, walking with a cane from the old mine injury, but alive, still here. "Welcome home, son." Marie-Claire was there, 23 now, a woman instead of the girl he'd left. She cried when she hugged him. They drove him to the family house, the same house he'd grown up in, smaller than he remembered, but home. That night at dinner, his mother asked the question, "Are you all right, Jacques? Truly?" He wanted to lie, wanted to say yes, wanted to pretend the war hadn't changed him, but he'd never lied to his mother. "I don't know, Maman. Ask me in 10 years. She nodded, understanding more than he said. Jacques spent the summer learning to be human again. He took work as a wilderness guide, teaching tourists how to track, how to hunt, how to move through forest without disturbing it. It was peaceful, quiet, no one shooting at him, no one dying because of his actions. But the nightmares continued. Orange light patterns, German faces, the barn at 735 yards, Klaus Richter and his daughters who'd never see their father again. Some nights Jacques woke up screaming. Some nights he didn't sleep at all. His father understood, never asked questions, just sat with him sometimes, in silence. 2 men who'd been to war, who'd seen things, who carried weights they'd never put down. By autumn, Jacques found work as a hunting instructor, teaching young men how to hunt ethically, how to make clean kills, how to respect the animals they killed. "One shot," he'd tell his students. "If you can't make a clean kill, you don't shoot. Animals deserve better than suffering because you were impatient." It was his father's lesson, passed down, continued. And slowly, year by year, Jacques learned to live with what he'd done. He never married, never had children. Some women were interested, but he couldn't imagine bringing children into a world where he existed, where the ghost light existed. He lived simply, guided hunters, taught wilderness skills, saved money he never spent. And every February 23rd, the anniversary of the first day, he visited the Catholic Church in Rivière-du-Loup, lit 137 candles, one for each German soldier he'd killed. He didn't pray for forgiveness, didn't think God forgave war. He just lit the candles, remembered the faces he'd imagined, acknowledged the deaths. It was the only memorial they'd get from him. 1986, Jacques was 65 years old. A military historian from the Canadian War Museum found him. Young woman, enthusiastic, researching tactical innovations from World War II. Sergeant Delacroix, I'd like to interview you about the Rhineland operation, the tomato tin technique. It's become part of military doctrine, taught in schools, but very little is documented about you personally. Jacques agreed to the interview, partly from curiosity, partly because she'd come all the way to Trois-Rivières, where he lived now. They sat in his small house, surrounded by books, hunting trophies, photographs. She asked questions. He answered, honestly, completely. And then she asked the question that mattered. You killed 137 men in 4 days. Are you proud of that achievement? Jacques was silent for 20 seconds, choosing words carefully. Proud? No. I'm grateful I could think clearly when others needed me to. I'm satisfied my idea worked and saved Canadian lives. But those 137 men, they were somebody's sons, brothers to someone. Some probably had children waiting for them. War forced me to kill. That was duty. But duty doesn't transform killing into something righteous. Necessary and good are not the same word. He paused, gathering thoughts. People focus on the number, 137. That's not what mattered to me. What mattered was that I survived when Etienne did not. What mattered was helping other Canadian boys get home to their families. The historian wrote quickly, capturing his words. What about the technique itself, the innovation? Jacques shook his head. I didn't do anything special or heroic. I simply looked at my problem from a different angle than my training suggested. The Germans were good soldiers, experienced, disciplined, dangerous. I couldn't beat them at their own game with their own methods. So I changed the game entirely. I made them play a game they'd never trained for. That's all. Nothing heroic, just different thinking. The interview lasted 3 hours. The historian left with pages of notes, recordings, photographs Jacques had never shown anyone. She published a paper, then a book chapter. Jacques' story spread. Military schools studied it. Tactical courses taught it. The ghost light was no longer just history, it was doctrine. 2008, November. Jacques Delacroix was 87 years old. His body was failing, heart disease, emphysema from years of cold and stress and breathing wood smoke. The doctors said months, maybe weeks. Jacques accepted this. He'd lived longer than Etienne, longer than Klaus Richter, longer than 137 Germans who never got the chance. On a cold November morning, lying in a hospital bed in Trois-Rivières, Jacques received an unexpected visitor. Major Thomas Blackwood, retired, decorated, living in Ottawa. He was ancient, frail, but here. I heard you were ill, wanted to see you one more time. Sir, you didn't have to come all this way. Yes, I did. Blackwood pulled up a chair, sat with the effort of extreme age. I wanted to tell you something I should have said back in 45. Sir, you saved my career, maybe my life. That defensive sector was bleeding us dry. German snipers were killing 3, 4 men a day. I was facing relief, probably demotion. You gave me a solution. You gave all of us a solution. Jacques shook his head weakly. I was just a corporal doing his job. You were a genius doing what genius does, creating something from nothing, seeing what others missed. I've spent 60 years in military service and instruction. I've never met another soldier like you. They talked for an hour, about the war, about the years after, about the weight of survival. Finally, Blackwood stood to leave. One more thing, Jacques. The museum in Ottawa. They're planning an exhibit, tactical innovations from World War II. Your rifle, your tomato tins. They want to honor you. I don't need honor, sir. I know, but we need to remember, need to teach future generations that thinking matters more than equipment, that innovation comes from unexpected places, from farm boys and hunters, and men who learned discipline in frozen marshes. Jacques was quiet, then nodded. If it helps future soldiers survive, if it teaches them to think, then yes, use my story. Blackwood left. Jacques never saw him again. Jacques Delacroix died on November 19, 2008, age 87, in Trois-Rivières, Quebec. His obituary in the local paper mentioned his military service briefly. Distinguished Conduct Medal, Sniper, 137 confirmed kills, but it focused on his 50 years teaching wilderness survival and hunting ethics, on his patience with students, on his insistence that hunting was about respect for animals and land, on the man he'd been after the war, not the soldier he'd been during it. The funeral was small, family, a few former students, some old military friends. Sergeant William Price came, 90 years old. He'd survived the war, lived a good life. He stood at the graveside and spoke quietly. Jacques taught me something important, that killing can be necessary without being good, that duty can be honorable without being proud, that surviving means carrying the weight of what you've done until the day you die. He carried that weight better than any man I've known. He never forgot the 137, never pretended they didn't matter, never celebrated their deaths. That's the difference between a soldier and a killer. A soldier remembers. A soldier carries the weight. A soldier never forgets that the enemy was human too. Price placed a dented tomato tin on the casket, the same tin from February 45. Holes punched through it, rusted, old. Rest easy, Jacques. You did your duty. Now let others carry the weight. February 2013, the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa opened a new exhibit. Innovation in Warfare, Tactical Genius from World War II. Jacques Delacroix's Lee Enfield rifle was displayed behind glass. Beside it, 3 tomato tins, dented, rusted, recovered from the Moanwood battlefield in 2011 by a German Historical Preservation Society. The placard read, "These ordinary objects, transformed by extraordinary thinking, represent the innovative spirit that characterized Canadian forces in the Second World War." Corporal Jacques Delacroix's 4-day operation in February 1945 demonstrated that effectiveness in combat stems not from superior equipment, but from superior thinking applied to available resources. In 4 days, using improvised deception devices, Corporal Delacroix eliminated 137 enemy combatants and fundamentally altered German defensive doctrine. His innovation has been studied by military forces worldwide and remains relevant to modern psychological warfare, electronic warfare, and information operations. Jacques Delacroix, 1921 to 2008, Corporal, 1st Canadian Army, 137 confirmed kills, February 23rd to 26th, 1945. The Ghost Light. Today, the tomato tins sit in the Canadian War Museum, behind glass, under lights, ordinary objects that became extraordinary through one man's desperate creativity. Visitors study them, read the placard, learn about the 137, about the 4 days in February when a Quebec farm boy changed warfare with garbage and sunlight. Most see tactical innovation, genius under pressure, lessons about thinking differently. Some see something else. They see a young man who learned to hunt because his family was hungry, who learned discipline because bullets were expensive, who learned that missing a shot meant people he loved went without. They see a soldier who did terrible things because war demanded them, who carried the weight of 137 deaths for 63 years, who lit candles every February 23rd for men whose names he never knew. They see someone who understood that being good at killing doesn't make killing good. Jacques Delacroix never wanted to be remembered as the ghost light. He wanted to be remembered as the man who taught discipline, who taught respect for animals, who taught young hunters that one shot should be enough. But history remembers what it remembers. And maybe that's appropriate, because the lesson of the Ghostlight isn't about tactical innovation or military genius. It's about the cost of survival, the weight of duty, the burden of being very, very good at something you wish you'd never had to do. Jacques Delacroix proved that creativity defeats technology, that thinking matters more than equipment, that one man with a different perspective can change everything. But he also proved something else, that you can do your duty perfectly and still carry the weight forever. That victory and guilt are not opposites. That remembering the humanity of your enemies is what separates soldiers from killers. The tomato tins remain in Ottawa, rusted, dented, protected behind glass. And somewhere in Quebec, in a small cemetery in Trois-Rivières, a headstone reads, Jacques Delacroix, 1921 to 2008, Sergeant, 1st Canadian Army, teacher, hunter, brother to all. No mention of the 137, no mention of the Ghostlight, just a man who learned to hunt for food, and then learned to hunt men, and then spent the rest of his life trying to remember the difference. For Etienne Moreau, who died investigating German positions, for Klaus Richter, whose daughters grew up fatherless, for all 137 men who never came home, may we remember them, may we learn from them, may we never forget that war's lessons are written in blood, and that the men who write those lessons carry the ink forever. The Ghostlight is gone, but the light remains, in museums, in doctrine, in the minds of soldiers who learn to think differently, and in the memory of a patient man from Quebec who proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the one that kills the most. It's the one that makes you remember why killing, even when necessary, should never be easy. Change the game, but never forget the cost.